Hey everybody, Jay Weidner, Reality Check. Thanks for watching and hit like and subscribe and all that. We're back getting towards the end now of A Monument to the End of Time, written by myself and the late, great Vincent Bridges. Getting good now. Getting really good now. All right, here we go. This is Chapter 8, Section 4, The Physics of Alchemy, Gnostic Science and the Transmuting Ether. Get my water here. We're kind of bringing it all together right now, the whole entire book. Alchemy, as we have seen, is a Gnostic science, informed by a sense of gnosis, a visionary and experiential knowing. The science of alchemy, its theories and methodologies, conforms to a unitary and inclusive principle of process. An alchemist must first know reality before methods can be derived to manipulate and transform it. At the core of this knowledge is an awareness of the ever-changing flux that is the essence of existence. To an alchemist, even minerals are living beings with which communication and interaction can be conducted. In this view, the entire universe and everything in it is in the process of evolution, of becoming. In 1968, while studying astrophysics at Johns Hopkins University, Paul Laviolette had a flash of gnosis that turned the promising young scientist into the first truly modern alchemist theorist. Quote, superimposed on the background of the music I'd been listening to came notions of flux, balance, and dynamic equilibrium. I was shown these principles harmonizing together, forming the very essence of existence, unquote. Dr. Laviolette tells us in the preface to his first book, Beyond the Big Bang. Quote, I was shown the classical physicist's view that physical reality is comprised of inert structures at its most basic level was wrong. I saw that nature at its most fundamental level is instead in perpetual balance, change, like life itself. For months following this experience, Laviolette found his thoughts filled with his new, quote, new ecological metaphysics, unquote. He began to see, quote, how through reoccurrence, natural processes form the enduring systems around us, atoms, living organisms, solar systems, galaxies, and so on, unquote. From this experience, he formulated what he calls, quote, my theory of existence, a theory of systems founded on the principles of process. A few years later, he discovered general systems theory and Society for General Systems Research, a community of scientists who were studying nature in terms of the laws of process. In this company, Laviolette tells us, quote, the burden of responsibility to communicate these basic truths to others was lifted from my shoulders, unquote. However, his Gnostic journey was not over just yet. The shock of finding others engaged in the same quest and the sudden influx of ideas and information that provided, along with a few synchronicities, jolted Laviolette to an even deeper level of understanding. One eventful evening, all of these concepts combined to, quote, spawn an insightful flash, a new theory of microphysics, unquote. This new approach to subatomic physics was not based on mechanics, but on chemistry, not on the static structure, but on process, unquote. He speculates that this avenue was overlooked because 18th century and 19th century ether physicists did not have chemical wave models such as dissipative structures, which were only developed in this century. This would be the 20th century. But when they are applied, the new field, which Laviolette labels subquantum kinetics, solves many of the problems that plague modern physics. From this realization, Laviolette began to elaborate his theory of microphysics. And so it came together. He found that it, quote, explained the origin of matter and energy, the structure of matter, how force fields arose, and how they induced movement, unquote. As his theory grew, he was shocked once again to, quote, find that others had followed this path, unquote. In 1975, a friend suggested that his emerging subquantum kinetics sounded a lot like Tarot metaphysics. Laviolette soon joined a class on the basic Tarot images, and to his amazement, quote, recognized that the Tarot was describing the science of systems genesis, the process by which forms, systems, spontaneously came into being. More specifically, it was presenting a theory of how our universe came into being, unquote. We should keep in mind that esoteric tradition holds that the Tarot is based on the Tree of Life model and that its trumps are the 22 intelligences of the Sefer Yetzirah, the 2nd century CE book of creation. This insight spurred him on to return for a PhD in general systems theory at Portland State University. He kept refining his subquantum kinetics theory, discovering that many ancient myths and divinatory systems, such as the I Ching and astrology, worked on these same principles. Finally, in 1985, his theory was published in a special issue of the International Journal of General Systems. A decade later, after more research and the hard work of finding a publisher, Laviolette released Beyond the Big Bang, Ancient Myth and the Science of Continuous Creation. In many ways, Dr. Laviolette's experiences serve as a control model for our theory of alchemical gnosis. His theory of subquantum kinetics was arrived at after an, quote, arduous transcendental journey, unquote, in which the vision itself informed the science. This Gnostic approach is at the core of the alchemical method. Dr. Laviolette demonstrates that even spontaneous contact with the alchemical meme produces a coherent pattern of development, right down to an intuition of cosmic catastrophe. And as his theory took form, Laviolette was able to recognize the other forms of the meme in ancient mythological and divinatory systems. This recognition allows us to place his understanding alongside that of other alchemists such as Fulcanelli and find the points of agreement. Dr. Laviolette begins Beyond the Big Bang by pointing out the science of creation at the core of certain ancient myths, such as the Egyptian story of the Atum emerging from the oceanic Nun. He speculates that certain of these ancient creation myths are actually survivals from an earlier advanced civilization and present the evidence from Egyptian sources for the 40,000-year history of mankind on Earth. He lists the most prominent ancient monumental survivals: the Temple of the Sphinx, Baalbek in Lebanon, the pre-Inca sites of the Peruvian Andes, and asks, quote, could these be relics of a technically advanced race that once inhabited the globe and met its decline during a period of climatic turmoil, unquote? Let me take a drink. It's a lot to take in here. Dr. Laviolette begins pointing to the considerable geological evidence summarized in Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods. Laviolette suggests that something catastrophic destroyed the ancient global civilization. He speculates that the core of such esoteric systems as the 12-sign zodiac and the Tarot may have originated in the period just prior to the last catastrophe and were designed to encode the advanced scientific knowledge of the dying civilization. He also considers this information broad enough to provide a cultural jumpstart for ancient Egypt, as suggested by R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch. And then he turns to what he feels is the key element, the idea of an active ether, a subtle medium, much like Reich's orgone, which fills space. This chaotic and creative ocean of none, as the Egyptians saw it, is an active transmutating substrate out of which emerges the particles of matter and energy that compose our reality. Dr. Laviolette realized that ancient ether metaphors work as if they were chemical reactions. Specifically, the metaphors resemble chemical concentration waves, which occur in certain kinds of chemical reactions. These chemical waves, unlike mechanical waves, arise spontaneously and persist as long as the reaction continues. Since chemical waves were first observed in 1958, it is understandable how the physicists of the 19th and early 20th century missed this version of a wave model. Yet the ancient scientists seem to understand and put great emphasis on the reaction diffusion wave phenomenon. The Greeks, with their bent towards empirical, focused on the more readily observable mechanical wave model. This view became gospel with Aristotle, as the luminiferous ether survived into the 19th century. However, this view of the ether, conceived as an inert solid substance that transmitted light waves, was manifestly incorrect, as shown by the Michelson-Morley experiment, which demonstrated that it was impossible to describe wave propagation through the ether in mechanical terms. This led to the discarding of the whole idea of the ether with the publication in 1905 of Einstein's theory of special relativity. Yet there were other explanations that didn't eliminate the ether by making the speed of light a constant. In 1904, Dutch physicist Hendrik Lorentz proposed an electromagnetic theory of the ether that suggested that a contraction effect, as a particle approached the speed of light, it became foreshortened or contracted in the direction of its motion, as well as become increasingly massive. It accounted for the apparent results of the Michelson-Morley experiment. This unitary electromagnetic approach was further elaborated on by Gustav May and related to the ancient Chinese transmuting ether concepts used by the 19th century physicist Zhang Xing-Tung to scientifically describe the traditional qi of Chinese medicine and alchemy. However, these unitary approaches fail to grab Western science, perhaps because of its emphasis on theoretical mathematics and its lack of grounding in physical constructs. The ether theory was never really disproven. As late as 1938, Herbert Ives, a Bell Labs physicist, published a refutation of special relativity, which supported Georgia Sagnat's 1913 ether demonstration. But because of the elegance of relativity's mathematics, its effectiveness in predicting local effects, the ether theory faded out of fashion. Dr. Laviolette sets out in his book to reinvigorate the ether theory with his new general systems view of microphysics. He realized that the ancient reaction diffusion ether of myth closely resembled his own theory of subquantum kinetics, which holds that, quote, all materials, subatomic particles, and energy quanta to be wave-like concentration patterns that self-organize in the continuously transforming ether, unquote. He found that these, quote, reaction kinetics are specified by 5 reaction diffusion equations, unquote, which he collectively calls Model G. This approach was inspired by work done in the 1960s at the Free University in Brussels. There, a computer-simulated reaction diffusion system was developed called the Brusselator, which was capable of producing both propagating and stable waves. Laviolette's Model G approach creates similar wave patterns, quote, a property, unquote, we are told, quote, that allows it to generate analogs of both material subatomic particles and propagating energy waves, unquote. Since components of the ancient creation myths and esoteric wisdom suggest a Model G-like ether, which, like the Brusselator, is only discernible through sophisticated computer modeling, then it is unlikely that the ancients stumbled on this information through simple observation alone. Yet, Laviolette tells us, quote, using relatively sophisticated systems theory concepts, they explain how a stationary, quote, matter wave arose from this reacting ether at the dawn of creation, unquote. These ancient insights and theories give rise to a very different description of physical creation than that of modern astrophysics, with its Big Bang beginning and continuously expanding future. Laviolette tells us that, quote, the Big Bang cosmology proclaims space, time, and existence to be an improbable transient phenomena of relatively finite extent that emerged essentially out of nowhere together with physical form, unquote. In the Big Bang, material existence exploded in the most infinitesimal fraction of a second from the tiniest point imaginable into a universe full of matter and energy. However, this explanation, this enormous quanta of energy, has no explanation. It just happened. From one nanosecond to the next, all the matter and the energy in the universe appeared out of nowhere and then went flying away out in all directions like cosmic debris. Subquantum kinetics and the ancient sciences of creation suggest that the universe began from a seed point, smaller than a mustard seed, says the Bahir, and developed out of an eternal and infinite transmutating ether. Changing page here. Creation is not the once and for all of the Big Bang, but a constant event over billions of years. From this constant creation comes particles of matter and energy, which eventually self-organizes towards the level of galaxies, stars, and human beings. The implications of this perspective on alchemy are profound. It is obvious that if transmutation on the physical level is a fact, then our view of the physics of reality must be seriously flawed. Dr. Laviolette suggests that the major flaw is the rejection of the reactive ether of the ancients and its possibilities for continuous creation. From this viewpoint, alchemical transformations is no longer an impossibility, but a natural outcome of the existential creative process of the universe. Before we turn to the cosmological implications of Dr. Laviolette's theory, which are profound and directly impact Fulcanelli's double catastrophe, we must look more closely at the transmuting ether of Dr. Laviolette's subquantum kinetics. He speculates that the ether is composed of tiny particles called etherions that are too small and intrinsic to be detected by instruments made of matter. The analogy Dr. Laviolette gives is that of trying to detect a water molecule with an instrument made of water waves, a truly impossible task. Yet we can predict certain things about these etherions. They would be of various types and would be able to transform and interact with each other in specific ways. Some would interact and transform individually, others would do so only in groups. But all of these reactions would follow orderly and well-defined reaction pathways. These reaction pathways create concentration waves, just as in chemical reactions. The problem lies in finding an interaction matrix that can be used to predict the properties of physical particles such as protons, electrons, and photons. The Brusselator simulation shows how waves can be generated by these sorts of transformations. But to make concentration patterns that serve as realistic description of these physical particles, Dr. Laviolette found that a third independent and intermediate ether state was required. This produced his Model G modification to the Brusselator, and it did allow for the generation of both standing or matter waves and the propagation radiant energy of photons and radio waves. This pattern of etherion flux reactions can be used to model the subatomic structure of reality. This transmuting ether would then make the physical universe an open system, with time as a kind of direction-oriented transformational dimension. If this etheric structure represents the ancient concept of an active and creative ether, then we could expect to find it modeled prominently in ancient symbology, and indeed we do. The Egyptian symbol for life, the Ankh, or the crux ansata, which Fulcanelli tells us symbolizes, quote, the universal life, unquote, and forms the ground plan of the Gothic cathedrals, is a stylized version of the Model G ether reaction pattern. As we saw above, in esoteric tradition, the Ankh is the only form of the cross that contains, without disturbing the all-important pattern of the entire tree of life. From this, we can say that the Ankh is the symbol of the universal life that emerges from the ether flux. All of existence is therefore infused with a life force, a primeval orgone energy, out of which larger and more coherent structures evolve. I'll just show you this real quick. That's the Ankh with the tree of life superimposed over it. Moreover, this approach solves the biggest flaw in current quantum theory, that of quantum non-locality. Foreseen as early as 1935 by Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen, and experimentally verified in the 1970s, this fly in the quantum soup simply says that it's possible for two protons to communicate at speeds beyond that of light itself, thus poking a hole in the assumptions of special relativity. Therefore, some local effects have non-local causes. The active ether model suggests that the indeterminate or non-local causality is produced by the unpredictable reactions of the ether flux. A reaction diffusion ether model would automatically include non-locality as a basic subquantum assumption. From this brief excursion into Dr. Laviolette's work on subquantum kinetics and ancient myth, we can see its importance to the astro-alchemical theories of Fulcanelli. We can also glimpse how this information was transmitted by Fulcanelli's green language of symbols. The Ankh is one of such deeply profound symbol, but Dr. Laviolette suggests that the most profound of all these ancient symbologies is that of the zodiac itself. In his chapter, quote, "The Thermodynamics of Astrology," unquote, Dr. Laviolette speculates that astrology presents a highly evolved physics describing the creation of our universe, unquote. It locates galactic center between the sting of the creation of our universe. I'll do that again. In his chapter, The Thermodynamics of Astrology, Dr. Laviolette speculates that astrology presents a highly evolved physics describing the creation of our universe. It locates galactic center between the sting of the Scorpio and the arrow of Sagittarius as, quote, the site where the first particle of matter arose, and indicates that the galaxy as a whole was formed through the process of central creation and radial dispersion of matter, unquote. This concept is very close to Reich's ideas on the central generation and dispersal of organic energy in a radial flow outward from the galactic center, which forms the alignment of our solar and planetary ecliptics. Quote, at the same time, unquote, Dr. Laviolette informs us, quote, the zodiac conveys a second important message, namely that this ongoing matter-energy creation process can at times become quite violent, resulting in explosive outbursts, unquote. Thus, he speculates may have caused the catastrophe that destroyed the ancient advanced civilization. The heart of the galaxy, he warns us, quote, could launch another attack at some unspecified time in the future, unquote. Dr. Laviolette closes his epic work by asking, quote, did an outburst of cosmic rays from the core of our galaxy wash over our planet thousands of years ago, and did that event lead to the near extinction of the human race? Was the real purpose behind encoding this ancient physics to help future generations understand the cause of a global catastrophe and to warn humanity that a similar event would occur at some future date, unquote? Clearly, these are questions that go directly to the heart of our investigation. If anyone could find an answer to these questions, it was clearly Dr. Laviolette. And I actually that's it for that chapter. I could totally just getting really good here. We're reaching our final conclusions, and we can see that the subquantum kinetics and the evolving ether and dissipative waves are really the underlying quality of reality, and that our physics are just way off. So I ended up, by the way, before I wrote this book, I directed Paul's second book, which we're going to get into next time, Earth Under Fire. And I worked with Paul on that, and it was a great experience. And Paul is truly one of the great geniuses of our time, unheralded, but still a great genius. And I really, really appreciate you, Paul. Thanks for all your great work. And I hope you guys enjoyed the show. I'm Jay Weidner. This is Reality Check, reading from A Monument to the End of Time, Alchemy, Fulcanelli, and the Great Cross. And you can see how all of these concepts, from the green language to symbology from Egypt, is now coalescing into an alchemical understanding of how reality works. So anyway, I'm Jay Weidner, and thanks for watching, and I will be back, hopefully, and thanks for watching.